Eliza walked through the grand streets of Sereth Prime, the capital city of the Vauren homeworld. The twin moons shone brightly above, casting a soft silver glow over the towering crystalline buildings. The streets were filled with proud Vauren citizens, tall, elegant beings with sharp, angular features and deep violet skin. They moved with purpose, speaking in refined tones, their voices carrying the weight of their proud civilization. But as Eliza walked past them, their conversations quieted. Some looked away as if she were invisible. Others cast her glances filled with pity or quiet disdain. She was used to it. She had lived with it all her life. Among the Vauren, fertility was everything. Their society placed immense importance on continuing their bloodlines, on producing strong offspring to carry on their legacy. But Eliza had been born different. The healers had confirmed it when she was still young. She would never be able to bear children. From that moment on, she had been treated as lesser. It did not matter that she was intelligent, that she was skilled in combat, or that she had devoted herself to the study of history and diplomacy. None of it mattered when, in the eyes of her people, she was incomplete. A Vauren woman who could not give birth had no purpose. Eliza clenched her fists as she reached the marketplace, the scent of exotic fruits and roasted meats filling the air. She had come here to buy supplies, nothing more. But as she approached a vendor, she caught the whispers. "That's her, isn't it? The infertile one. She should not even be allowed in the city. What future can she give us? I heard she tried to join the High Council, but they turned her away." No surprise. Eliza's grip tightened around the small pouch of credits in her hand. She had long since learned to ignore them. Their words no longer wounded her as they once had, but the weight of them still pressed against her shoulders, reminding her of her place in this world. She handed her credits to the vendor, an elderly man who barely looked at her as he took the payment, and gave her the supplies. No words of thanks, no kindness, just cold indifference. With her bag in hand, she turned to leave, but then she heard a commotion. The deep, unfamiliar voice rang out through the marketplace, rough yet filled with amusement. "I'll take 3 of those. Yeah, the red ones. Oh, and whatever that is, I'll try it." Eliza turned her head and saw him. A human. The sight of him was jarring. He was shorter than most Vauren, broad-shouldered and clad in the dark armor of the United Terran Forces. His hair was short and dark, his skin tanned from what she assumed was years spent under harsh suns. His face was strong, but it was his expression that caught her off guard. Unlike the cold stares of her people, his eyes were filled with curiosity as he examined the food before him, grinning at the vendor. She had heard of humans before. They were a relatively new species in the galactic scene, but their presence had quickly grown. They were not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most technologically advanced. But they were resourceful, resilient, and more than anything, they had a way of shaping the universe around them. This human, whoever he was, had no fear of standing in a crowded Vauren marketplace, surrounded by those who looked at him as an outsider. He did not shrink away from the stares. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the attention. Eliza turned to leave, but in that moment, the human's gaze met hers. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then, to her shock, he smiled. Not a smirk, not a mocking grin, just a simple, warm smile, as if she were not invisible, as if she were not an outcast. Eliza hesitated. No one smiled at her. Not like that. Before she could decide whether to acknowledge him, a sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Cries of alarm filled the air as debris fell from the sky. Smoke rose from the far end of the marketplace, and in the distance, the warning sirens of Sereth Prime began to wail. Eliza's instincts kicked in immediately. She dropped her supplies and reached for the blade at her waist. The human, too, reacted quickly. His easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by sharp focus. He reached for the rifle slung across his back, scanning the area. His eyes met hers again, and this time there was no amusement in them, only understanding. "We need to move," he said, his voice steady. Now, Eliza didn't argue. Whoever this human was, whatever his reasons for being here, one thing was clear. Seraph Prime was under attack. And for the first time in her life, Eliza had a purpose greater than the expectations of her people. She would fight. And she had a feeling that this human, whoever he was, would be fighting beside her. The ground trembled beneath Eliza's feet as another explosion tore through the marketplace. Smoke filled the air, turning the bright crystal structures of Seraph Prime into dark, shadowed ruins. Screams echoed from all directions as civilians ran for shelter. Eliza didn't hesitate. Years of training, despite being denied a warrior's rank, had prepared her for moments like this. She gripped the blade at her waist and turned toward the source of the attack. Beside her, the human soldier moved just as quickly. "Name's Carter," he said, raising his rifle and scanning the area. "United Terran Forces." "Eliza," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Nice to meet you, Eliza. Mind telling me who's ruining our shopping trip?" Carter asked, his tone calm, but his eyes sharp with focus. Eliza narrowed her gaze at the incoming enemy ships. Sleek, dark vessels hovered above the city, their crimson markings unmistakable. "The Thrask Dominion. They are warlords," she explained, her grip tightening on her weapon. "They take what they want. Planets, resources, people." "Yeah, we've dealt with their kind before," Carter muttered. "But why attack now?" Before Eliza could answer, a group of Thrask warriors descended from one of the ships, landing heavily on the stone streets. They were large, towering over even the tallest Va'rin, their armored bodies built for destruction. Their glowing red eyes scanned the terrified civilians, searching for something or someone. Then one of them pointed directly at Eliza. "You," the Thrask soldier growled. "You are coming with us." Eliza didn't move. She had no idea why they wanted her, but she knew one thing: she would not surrender. Carter, however, was already in motion. Before the Thrask could take another step, he raised his rifle and fired. A precise energy shot struck the Thrask warrior in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back. That was all it took. The battle began. Eliza leaped forward, her blade slicing through the air. She dodged an incoming strike from a Thrask soldier and countered with a swift, precise movement, her blade cutting through his armor. He fell with a roar of pain. Carter, meanwhile, fought with a different kind of skill. He moved quickly, dodging attacks with an agility that surprised even Eliza. His rifle never missed a shot, and when the enemy got too close, he used his combat knife with brutal efficiency. More Thrask warriors landed in the marketplace, forcing Eliza and Carter back. It was clear they could not fight them all, not alone. "We need to fall back," Carter said, dodging another attack. "Got a safe place we can go." Eliza hesitated. She had never been considered important enough to be given a place of safety, but she knew where the city's defenders would be regrouping. "The Grand Hall," she said. "The Va'rin warriors will be gathering there." "Good enough for me," Carter said. "Let's move." They sprinted through the burning streets, weaving through panicked civilians and collapsed buildings. The city, once a place of beauty, was now a battlefield. As they ran, Carter glanced at her. "Why were they after you?" "I do not know," Eliza admitted. "But it does not matter. I will not let them take me." Carter grinned. "That's the spirit." They reached the Grand Hall, its towering entrance guarded by Va'rin warriors in shining armor. The moment Eliza approached, the guards hesitated, their eyes flickering with recognition and doubt. "She is not meant to be here," one of them muttered. "She is not one of us," another said. Eliza felt the familiar sting of rejection. Even in a time of war, they saw her as unworthy. Carter, however, stepped forward. "She's the only reason I'm alive right now," he said. "So unless you want to fight this war alone, you'd better let us through." The guards exchanged glances, but eventually stepped aside. Eliza and Carter entered the hall, where the Va'rin leaders stood around a massive holographic map of the planet. The Supreme Commander, a tall and imposing figure, turned to them. His gaze landed on Eliza, and for a moment, there was surprise in his eyes. "You should not be here," he said. "With all due respect," Carter interjected, "we don't have time for tradition. The Thrask are targeting her, and that means she's important. We need to figure out why." The room fell silent. Then, the Supreme Commander nodded. "Very well," he said. "Then let us find out what the Thrask truly want." Eliza exhaled slowly. For the first time in her life, she was not being ignored. She was being heard. And as the war raged on outside, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Inside the Grand Hall, the air was thick with tension. The holographic map of Seraph Prime flickered in the center of the war room, displaying red warning signals across the city. Va'rin leaders stood in a circle, their expressions grave as they analyzed the ongoing battle. Soldiers rushed in and out, delivering reports of enemy movements. Eliza stood near the entrance, feeling out of place despite the chaos. She had spent her entire life being ignored by the Va'rin elite. Now she was here, at the heart of the war effort. And yet, even in this moment, she could see the doubtful glances, the silent judgment in their eyes. Beside her, Carter stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Unlike the others, he did not seem to care about her status. He had fought beside her, trusted her in battle. That was all that mattered to him. The Supreme Commander turned toward them. His presence was imposing, his silver armor gleaming under the hall's bright lights. His gaze landed on Eliza first, then on Carter. "You claim the Thrask are targeting her," he said, his deep voice carrying across the chamber. "Do you have proof?" Carter gestured toward Eliza. "They called her out specifically in the market. They weren't there for supplies or to cause random destruction. They'd wanted her." Murmurs spread through the room. The Va'rin leaders exchanged uneasy glances. "This makes no sense," one of them said. "Why would the Thrask want her?" Eliza remained silent, but deep inside, the same question haunted her. The Thrask were warlords. They took planets, not individuals. The Supreme Commander studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to a nearby officer. "Bring the intelligence officer." Now, moments later, a Va'rin strategist entered the hall, his robes flowing behind him. His face was lined with age, his eyes sharp with knowledge. He carried a datapad in his hand, its screen flashing with intercepted Thrask communications. "We have been decoding enemy transmissions," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Several messages mention a specific target, a Va'rin woman. They refer to her as the Key." Silence filled the room. Eliza stiffened. "The Key," she repeated. "What does that mean?" The strategist shook his head. "We do not know. But the fact that they are searching for you means you are important to them in some way." Carter let out a low whistle. "Well, that explains why they didn't just level the city. They're looking for you." He turned to Eliza, his expression thoughtful. "Any reason you'd be special to them?" Eliza hesitated. She had never been considered special. She was an outcast, someone without value in Va'rin society. But the Thrask saw her differently. "I do not know," she admitted. The Supreme Commander let out a slow breath. "Whatever their reason, we cannot allow them to capture you. If the Thrask are willing to launch a full-scale attack just to find one person, it means they believe she holds great importance." Carter smirked. "Then I guess we make sure they never get their hands on her." The Supreme Commander eyed him carefully. "You are a human soldier. Why do you care about what happens to her?" Carter shrugged. "Because I don't like bullies. And because she saved my life back there. That's enough reason for me." Eliza turned toward him, surprised by his words. He had no reason to defend her, no obligation to stand by her side. Yet he did. The Supreme Commander studied him for a moment before nodding. "Very well. You will assist in her protection." Carter grinned. "Gladly." The Supreme Commander turned to Eliza. From this moment forward, You will remain within the secured zone. We will have guards stationed at all entrances. You are not to leave without permission." Elisa felt a surge of frustration. She had spent her whole life being told what she could and could not do. Now, even in war, she was being treated as something fragile. "I can fight," she said firmly. The Supreme Commander raised a brow. "You are unranked. You have never been given a command." "Because you never let me," she shot back. "But that does not mean I lack skill." A brief silence followed. Then, Carter chuckled. "She's got a point." The Supreme Commander considered her for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. You will remain under the human soldier's command. He will determine when you are ready for battle." Elisa opened her mouth to argue, but Carter cut in. "Deal." She turned toward him, narrowing her eyes. "You do not command me, human." He smirked. "Hey, I just saved you from being locked in a room. You're welcome." Elisa exhaled sharply but said nothing. She had fought for a chance to prove herself. Now it seemed that chance would come alongside a human soldier. Outside, the battle for Sereth Prime raged on. But inside the Grand Hall, a new alliance had been formed. And for the first time in her life, Elisa felt like she wasn't fighting alone. The Grand Hall's war room had quieted, but the tension remained thick in the air. Elisa stood near the holographic map, her thoughts swirling like a storm. The Thrask were searching for her, calling her the key. But why? What did she possess that they needed so badly? Beside her, Carter leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his sharp eyes studying the gathered Va'rin leaders. He might have been an outsider, a lone human in a room full of proud warriors, but he didn't look intimidated. If anything, he seemed amused by their stiff postures and endless strategy discussions. "All right," Carter said, breaking the silence. "If they're after her, then we need to figure out why." Anyone got theories? The Supreme Commander exhaled. "The Thrask do not act without reason. They are conquerors, not scavengers. If they want her, she must hold something of value." His gaze shifted to Elisa. "Are you certain you know nothing of this?" Elisa clenched her fists. "I have spent my entire life being told I am worthless, that I am incapable of contributing to our people. Do you truly think I would be hiding some great secret?" The room fell silent. Carter smirked. "Well, if that's true, then the Thrask are even dumber than they look." A few of the Va'rin officers stiffened at his casual tone, but the Supreme Commander simply nodded. "Then we must seek answers elsewhere." He turned to the intelligence officer. "What else have we intercepted?" The strategist tapped his datapad, pulling up another message. A garbled transmission played through the room, distorted by static. But one word was clear. "Bloodline." Elisa's breath caught in her throat. Carter frowned. "Bloodline?" He glanced at Elisa. "Does that mean anything to you?" Elisa hesitated. Bloodlines were sacred in Va'rin culture. Everything, power, status, even identity, was tied to one's lineage. But she had never been considered important in that regard. She was an outcast, a forgotten name in history. Still, something felt wrong. Before she could respond, an alarm blared through the Grand Hall. Red lights flashed across the war room, and a voice echoed through the comm system. "Thrask forces have breached the lower district. We have incoming hostiles." The Supreme Commander's expression hardened. "They are moving faster than expected." Carter pushed off the wall, already checking his rifle. "Then I guess we'd better move too." The Supreme Commander turned to Elisa. "You are under his command. Stay close to him." Elisa bristled, but nodded. She had wanted a chance to fight. Now she had it. Carter grinned. "Let's go, key girl." She shot him a glare. "Do not call me that." He chuckled. "No promises. The battle begins." Elisa and Carter sprinted through the palace corridors, following a squad of Va'rin warriors toward the lower district. Through the grand windows, she saw the city burning. Thrask ships hovered above, dropping reinforcements onto the streets. Fires raged, and distant explosions sent shockwaves through the air. As they reached the outer walls, Vahrin soldiers had already engaged the enemy. Thrask warriors stormed the district, their massive bodies tearing through defenses. Carter took cover behind a collapsed structure, motioning for Eliza to do the same. "All right, what's the plan?" Eliza peeked over the rubble, assessing the battlefield. The Thrask were advancing in tight formations, their heavy armor making them nearly unstoppable. Vahrin warriors were holding their ground, but barely. "We need to break their line," she said. "If they reach the central square, we lose control of the district." Carter nodded. "Got it. I'll provide cover fire. You got anything long range?" Eliza unsheathed her twin energy blades. "No, but I do not miss." Carter smirked. "I like your confidence. Try not to get shot." Before she could respond, he leaped over the rubble and opened fire. His energy rifle sent precise, rapid shots into the enemy ranks, forcing them to slow their charge. Eliza didn't hesitate. She dashed forward, weaving between debris with incredible speed. The moment she reached the first Thrask warrior, she struck. Her blade sliced through the gaps in his armor, and he collapsed with a roar. More came at her, but she was faster. She ducked under a heavy swing, rolled behind another soldier, and drove her blade into his back. The battlefield became a blur of motion, dodging, striking, moving with deadly precision. Carter watched her with a mix of awe and amusement. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." She didn't respond, too focused on the fight. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. The battle raged on, but with their combined efforts, the Thrask advance began to falter. Vahrin warriors pushed forward, reclaiming lost ground. Then, a deep, guttural voice echoed across the district. "Enough." A massive Thrask warrior stepped forward, easily twice the size of the others. His crimson armor gleamed under the burning city lights, and his red eyes locked onto Eliza. "You cannot run from destiny, Vahrin," he growled. "Come with us, and we will spare your people." Eliza tightened her grip on her blades. "I do not bargain with monsters." The Thrask leader let out a low chuckle. "Then you will learn the truth the hard way." He raised his hand, and before she could react, a pulse of energy shot toward her. Carter moved instantly. He grabbed Eliza and pulled her down, the blast narrowly missing them. The ground where she had been standing was now scorched and cracked. "Okay," Carter muttered. "That guy's gonna be a problem." Eliza glared at the Thrask leader. She didn't know why they wanted her. She didn't know what the key truly meant. But she was done running. She was going to find out the truth. And she was going to make sure the Thrask never got what they wanted. The battlefield was a chaos of fire and destruction. The Thrask leader stood tall, his crimson armor gleaming in the flickering flames. His piercing red eyes focused on Eliza as if she were the only thing that mattered. "You cannot escape your destiny, Vahrin," he said again, his deep voice carrying across the broken streets. "You are the key. Your blood is the answer." Eliza's heart pounded. She had never been important in her own society. She had been shamed, cast aside, treated as if she had no value. And now, these invaders, the Thrask, believed she was worth an entire war. Carter, still crouched beside her behind the rubble, let out a low whistle. "I don't like how he's talking about your blood. That's usually not a good sign." Eliza tightened her grip on her energy blades. "Then we will make sure he does not get what he wants." Carter smirked. "That's the spirit." The Thrask leader raised his clawed hand, signaling his warriors. More soldiers surged forward, their heavy armor clanking as they advanced. The Vahrin warriors braced for another attack. Eliza moved first. She darted through the ruins, her speed unmatched. The Thrask were strong but slow. She knew how to use that against them. With precise strikes, she sliced through their armor, cutting them down one by one. Carter provided cover fire, his rifle blazing. "You know, for someone who was worthless, you sure fight like a legend." Eliza didn't answer, but his words struck something inside her. She had spent her life believing she was nothing. But now, with every battle, she felt stronger. The Thrask leader watched her with a calculating gaze. Then, with a swift motion, he activated a device on his wrist. A pulse of energy erupted outward. Eliza barely had time to react before she felt it. Her body froze in place, her muscles locked by an invisible force. Her blade slipped from her hands, clattering to the ground. Carter cursed. "What the?" The Thrask leader stepped forward. "You have your mother's speed, her strength, but you do not know the truth, do you?" Eliza struggled against the invisible force, her heart racing. "What are you talking about?" The Thrask leader's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Your bloodline, child. You are not just any Varin. You are the last daughter of the First Blood." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The First Blood, the original Varin warriors, those who had been genetically enhanced, stronger, faster, nearly unstoppable. They had led the Varin to their first great victories across the stars. But over generations, their pure bloodline had faded. Carter frowned. "And why does that matter to you?" The Thrask leader's gaze flicked to him. "Because her blood can awaken something lost, something ancient. The Thrask do not seek conquest, human. We seek survival. And she is the key to our future." Eliza's mind reeled. You're lying." The leader shook his head. "You feel it, don't you? The power in your veins. It is why you are faster, stronger than the others. The Supreme Commander knows. That is why they cast you aside. Because they fear what you could become." Eliza's heart pounded. Could it be true? Had her people hidden this from her all along? Carter didn't give her time to think. He suddenly raised his rifle and fired straight at the Thrask leader's wrist device. The blast struck true, and in an instant, the invisible force holding Eliza vanished. She gasped as she regained control, her muscles burning from the strain. "Sorry, but no one kidnaps my teammate," Carter said with a grin. "Come on, let's finish this." Eliza grabbed her blades. The Thrask leader narrowed his eyes. "You do not understand what is at stake." Eliza steadied herself, her mind clearing. She didn't care about the Thrask's motives. She didn't care about hidden bloodlines or ancient power. All she knew was that she had a choice. For the first time in her life, she was not going to let others decide her fate. She was going to fight back. With a battle cry, she lunged forward, her blades flashing. The fight was far from over. The night sky burned with fire as explosions lit up the battlefield. The city was in chaos. Varin warriors clashed with Thrask invaders, energy blasts streaked through the air, and towering structures crumbled under the weight of destruction. But Eliza saw none of it. Her entire focus was on the Thrask leader standing before her, his crimson armor gleaming under the flickering lights. His words still echoed in her mind. The last daughter of the First Blood. A lie? Or the truth she had been denied her whole life? It didn't matter. Right now, she had one goal: defeat him. Carter reloaded his rifle beside her, glancing at her with a smirk. "So, what's the plan, key girl?" Eliza tightened her grip on her energy blades. "We finish this." The Thrask leader let out a low chuckle. "Brave words, but you do not understand the power within you." He raised his massive hand, and his armor pulsed with dark energy. "Shall I show you?" Without warning, he lunged forward. His speed was unnatural for his size. One moment he stood still, the next he was right in front of Eliza, swinging his energy-forged axe. Eliza barely dodged in time. The ground cracked where the weapon struck, sending debris flying. She rolled to the side and struck back, her twin blades slashing toward his exposed side. He blocked effortlessly, twisting his weapon to deflect her attack. The sheer force sent her skidding backward. Carter fired a barrage of energy rounds, aiming for weak points in the armor. The shots hit, but the Thrask leader barely flinched. He turned toward Carter and raised his hand. A pulse of energy erupted from his palm. Carter barely had time to throw himself behind cover as the blast ripped through the street. "Okay," he muttered. "This guy is officially annoying." Eliza didn't hesitate. She dashed forward again, her blades moving in a blur. She struck high, then low, searching for an opening. But the Thrask leader was skilled. He countered each attack with precise movements. Then, suddenly, he grabbed her wrist mid-strike. Pain shot through her arm as he twisted, forcing her to drop one of her blades. His grip was crushing, his strength overwhelming. "You cannot deny your nature," he growled. "Your blood holds the power to awaken an ancient force. Join us, and we will reshape the galaxy." Eliza gritted her teeth. "I do not care about ancient power." With all her strength, she drove her knee into his chest. He barely reacted. Instead, he pulled her closer, lowering his voice. "They cast you aside because they feared you. But we—" A shot rang out. The Thrask leader staggered as a bullet struck the exposed part of his neck. Carter stood a few feet away, his gun smoking. "You talk too much." Eliza didn't waste the opportunity. She wrenched free, grabbed her fallen blade and spun, her weapon slicing through the Thrask leader's armor. He roared in pain, stumbling back. Dark energy crackled around him, but Eliza wasn't done. She moved faster than ever before, her instincts sharper, her body reacting as if it had finally awakened. One strike. 2. 3. Each slash cut deeper, breaking through his defenses. He tried to counter, but she was faster, stronger. And then, with a final strike, she drove her blade through his chest. The battlefield seemed to go silent. The Thrask leader looked down at the blade piercing his armor, then back at Eliza. For a moment, his glowing red eyes flickered. Then he let out a breathless chuckle. "You truly are one of them." His body shuddered, and then he collapsed. Eliza stood over him, breathing heavily. It was over. The Thrask soldiers, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. The Va'rin warriors seized the moment, launching a final assault that pushed the invaders back. The enemy was retreating. Carter walked up beside Eliza, glancing down at the fallen leader. He let out a low whistle. Well, that was dramatic. Eliza exhaled, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion creeping into her limbs. "It is done." Carter looked at her, his usual smirk replaced by something more thoughtful. "So, what now?" Eliza stared at the city, still burning from the battle. She had spent her whole life believing she was worthless. Now, she knew the truth. She wasn't just a forgotten outcast. She was something more, and she would decide her own future. But first, there was still one last battle left to fight. The Thrask had retreated, but they would be back. And this time, she would be ready. The battlefield was silent now. The fires that had once raged across the city were dying down, leaving behind smoldering ruins. The sky, once dark with smoke and war, now showed hints of the first light of dawn. Eliza stood in the middle of it all, her energy blades still in her hands, their glow slowly fading. The Thrask were gone, their retreat confirmed. The Va'rin warriors stood victorious, but the cost of battle lay all around them. Carter walked up beside her, his rifle resting against his shoulder. "Not bad," he said with a small smile. "You took down their leader and scared the rest off. That's one way to end a war." Eliza exhaled, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. "It is not over," she said. "They will return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will come back." Carter nodded. "Probably. But next time, they won't find us unprepared." Eliza turned to look at the remaining Va'rin warriors. Many were injured, some mourning their fallen comrades. For so long, they had followed the Supreme Commander's orders without question. But today, everything had changed. Eliza stepped forward, raising her voice so they could hear. "The Thrask called me the last daughter of the First Blood," she said. "They believed my power would awaken something ancient." The warriors stared at her, some in shock, others with curiosity. I do not care about ancient power, she continued, but I do care about the future of our people. She looked at each of them, meeting their eyes. For years, we have fought battles because the Supreme Commander commanded it. We have followed without questioning, without knowing why. She paused. But now we have a choice. Murmurs spread through the warriors. Some looked uncertain, while others stood straighter, as if seeing her in a new light. The Supreme Commander cast me aside because they feared what I could become, Eliza said, but I am not afraid anymore. One warrior stepped forward. He was older, with scars marking his face. What do you ask of us, Eliza of the First Blood? Eliza hesitated. She had never asked anyone to follow her before. She had spent her life being told she was nothing, that she had no purpose. But now she knew better. I ask you to stand with me, she said, not as pawns of the Supreme Commander, not as nameless warriors, but as Va'rin, strong, free, and ready to choose our own path. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then the older warrior knelt. I will follow you, he said. One by one, others followed. Some hesitated, but slowly, more and more knelt before her. Carter whistled. Well, look at that. Seems like you just started a revolution. Eliza felt a strange mix of emotions, shock, pride, and a deep sense of responsibility. She had spent so long searching for her place in the universe. Now she had found it. A familiar voice interrupted the moment. You dare defy the Supreme Commander. Eliza turned sharply. The Supreme Commander stood at the edge of the battlefield, their dark robes billowing in the wind. Their expression was unreadable, but their voice was sharp with warning. You have no right to challenge me, the Supreme Commander said. You are nothing but a mistake. An outcast. Eliza held her ground. Maybe that is what you wanted me to believe, she said. But I know the truth now. The Supreme Commander's eyes narrowed. You think leading a rebellion will save our people. They stepped closer. The Thrask will return, and when they do, they will wipe us out. Eliza met their gaze, unafraid. Then we will be ready. We will fight for ourselves, not for you. For a moment, the Supreme Commander said nothing. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Carter let out a breath. That went better than I expected. Eliza turned to her warriors. There is much to do, she said. We must rebuild. Prepare. And when the Thrask return, we will show them that the Va'rin do not kneel. A new dawn was rising over the ruins of the battlefield. Eliza had found her purpose, and she would never be cast aside again. The end. Next.